Welcome to the 3% Podcast, the occasional podcast in which we talk about books, publishing, the industry, all sorts of things. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I am joined by Tom Comitta, who is the author of three books. One is the Nature book, which is available now from Coffee House Press. There's also another book coming from Coffee House Press called Patchwork, which comes out this fall, I believe in October. Do you have the galley there in front of us?
The
You got the
final version.
Oh,
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got the final version. Oh, that looks
yeah,
beautiful too. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the cover and it looks really nice. I know there's really cool pictures inside there too, because I've been
yeah, yeah.
scrolling through the PDF. And then the book that we're here to talk about mostly today, which is People's Choice novel, the most wanted novel and the most unwanted
People's
novel.
choice literature.
People's Choice Literature, sorry.
Yeah.
People's Choice Literature, which came out from Columbia University Press earlier in June and is interesting. I'm not sure how to even, I don't even want to phrase it. I want to let you explain it because if
Mm.
I start to explain it, I'm taking away from like what the base says. But, anyways, how are you doing today, first of all?
Yeah, I'm good. My child and I went to see Singing in the Rain earlier,
Hell
which
yeah.
I realized as I was watching it, it's like a meta
Oh,
musical,
yeah.
so it seemed to resonate, at least with the most unwanted.
Oh,
Although it's like one of
absolutely.
the best movies.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So
Yeah.
we can let's go with People's Choice Literature and talk about that first, since that's what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Maybe working the other ones along the way because I think that, and I could be wrong about this, but there's sort of different strategies of like writing that you're using, but in all instances, very unique, very much like reminds me a little bit of David Shields' book at times, like Reality Hunger, and then things
Mm.
that are more like uh Olympian to a certain degree, and also like, as you'll say, data driven. So, do you want to explain what the premise was behind this and how this book or two books or three books came to be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I literally maybe I shouldn't make it too visual because some people would be listening, but I do have a presentation I could
Oh,
give.
bring it up. Let's
Do
go.
it? Okay.
Let's do it. Let's
Okay.
make it. Let's do
Share
it the
screen.
best we can. You should be able to. And
Cool.
when I'm saying for for clarity, when I say there's one, two, or three books, I mean just within People's Choice Literature. I think
Oh, right. Yeah,
there
yeah.
are there are multiple ways to look at this as like different kind of breakdowns. And personally,
Cool.
I keep thinking of it as three book setup. To be honest,
Yeah, yeah. Right, because there's the horror collection.
well, there's a horror. Oh God, then four. Because I'm thinking. So to clarify this, as we'll get into, there is a most wanted novel and a most unwanted novel, which are clearly like different books. But then there's the introduction, and then there's the idea that I have of like reading it as one whole book. And as you read it as one whole book, it encompasses the other two and creates a new kind of layer to everything. And then, like you said, there's the horror collection in the middle of the most unwanted novel, uh, which we'll explain too.
Yeah. By the way, I'm on my partner's computer. Oh, I just want to go full screen here, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I think that's it.
okay, so actually sorry for the technical difficulty. I'm gonna share preview now.
No
There
worries.
we go. There we go. We got it. Okay. So yeah, so I gotta figure out how to go full screen. Oh, view, full screen. Let's do this. There we go. All right. Yeah, so
Here we go.
the story begins as the first line in the book
Yeah.
says in the early 90s, Komar and Melamed, these avant-garde dissident artists who left the Soviet Union and landed in New York. Soviet Union falls. They make this democratic art where they pull the United States asking for their interest in paintings, favorite
Mhm.
color, painting size, subject matter. And they make, as you can see here, if you're looking at home, or you can Google it, the most wanted and most unwanted paintings in America. And the most wanted is basically like a Thomas Kincaid
Yeah.
blend of like people wanted historical figures. That's why George Washington's there.
Yeah, I was gonna say George Washington's front and center.
Right. Everyday people, there's some kids, and they want animals. So there's deer. And 60% of people wanted blue, so 60% of the painting is blue. Is that like mathematical?
Oh, wow.
And also they wanted a dishwasher size. That's I'm showing the scale here.
Oh my God.
Um, what they didn't want was a paperback sized sequence of thickly painted triangles, abstraction. People didn't want shading, which is why it's shaded.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
all of those colors there are the most unwanted colors, like
Really?
gray. orange, yellow, red. I'm surprised that red would
Yeah.
be, but blue
Okay.
is the most wanted. And then they went on and they pulled 14 other countries and found that basically the world loves blue, and
Weird.
that everybody except for the Netherlands, of the 14 polled, and there was everything from Russia to China to Kenya to Turkey to France to the Netherlands and Italy. Everybody had the same setup. Like realism was wanted, abstraction unwanted. Netherlands wanted abstraction. So
Oh, wow. I like
anyway,
that.
yeah, yeah. Um, oh, how do I? Oh, and then so trying to move. Oh, here we go. And then so a few years later, their friend, this composer Dave Soldier, did a similar experiment with with music. And he did it less scientifically, which is funny because he's a scientist, he's a
Oh,
neuroscientist.
uh-huh.
Um, but whereas Komar Melmoud used like like a $70,000 like for the public opinion poll, like phone poll.
Right.
This was at the Dia Foundation, online and in person. People filled out this form, and so the sample was a little bit smaller,
Uh-huh.
and determined the most wanted, unwanted music in the United States in 1996. The most wanted, because it's 96, is basically like Whitney Houston meets Bruce Springsteen meets Kenny G.
Of course.
And the most unwanted is this like 20-minute genre romp with like accordions and bagpipes and a country singer doing hip hop to cowboy music and kids singing Walmart holiday jingles for every holiday. And it all ends with this political rant that blames you, the reader, for all the horrors in the world.
Oh my God,
Um,
that's great.
and then there's a sing along that's like, no, definitely you. It is you, and it's me. We did it. You know. Um,
I do want to ask one question about
yeah,
this real quick. The most wanted song, I just check the guitarist Brennan Reed. Is that Brennan Reed from Living Color?
probably. I mean, Dave Soldier knows a lot. He toured with John Cale,
Oh, okay.
and I think he collaborated with um, oh my gosh, not Woody Guthrie. Who's the guy who did the big sing-alongs?
Ooh,
And
I'm not sure.
oh my gosh, he was just in the Bob Dylan movie. I'll remember it in a minute.
Okay, no
He's
worries.
collaborated with big people.
Yeah.
So yeah, very likely he worked with somebody who was well known.
Yeah. At
Um,
that time, that would have been
at the
that.
time. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
at
yeah.
that time, right? Like Living Color was a pretty big deal for like a hot minute in like the 90s. So that's perfect. That makes
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it was actually, I liked the paintings, but it was this music project that I first was aware of.
huh.
And it was the unwanted song where I was like, I want to write like the most unwanted novel. And then of course, once I got into it, I realized, I wanted to love both of them, and we'll get into how I did that. So, oh, yeah, so then I made these novels years later. I first emailed Kumar Milmed like 10 years ago, being like, can I do this? And they said, uh, you're going to need to raise like $70,000. And at the time, I was like, how would I ever do that? So I said,
My.
and at the time, I hadn't even written a novel yet. So I was like, can I even write a novel?
Right.
So I said, okay, thanks, bye. And then I had written a novel at a certain point. Like I wrote two actually, Nature Book and Patchwork.
Right.
And, Trump loses the 2020 election, Biden wins, and then Trump rejects it. And I just felt like maybe this was the right time to look at this democratic capitalist tool of polling,
Yeah.
um, as a way to like think about literature, but also like, polls like talk about what we share and what we don't share. And
Hmm.
obviously there's this question of also like, what the heck do we share anymore in our bubbles?
Fact.
Um, and I talked to some survey design experts, um, to see if it was even feasible, because
Yeah.
polling had a reputational hit in the 16
Sure.
and 20 election.
Yep.
Um, and basically, I found that even though they had that hit, that polling was still seen as the best way to determine taste. But people um, now combine them, and you can do it more cheaply now.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Vitaly Komar was going on a 90s idea when he said that I needed a lot of money. I still needed to raise $10,000, which is for me a
Really?
lot to raise.
Yeah.
Um, but these days you can do these like online polls that have these representative samples, and you can
Yep.
still claim scientific legitimacy. I found this Johns Hopkins survey design expert. Catherine Cornwall,
That's
and I was
super
like,
cool.
let's do everything you do at Johns Hopkins, and that's what we
Yeah.
did. Um,
I mean, that's really interesting and does it makes sense. I think it's really, as a stats person, I love it. I love it.
yeah, yeah, and but I also did one other thing because the thing about today is that you people use big data.
Hmm.
Infamously, they use social media to determine taste. There's these so people, if you're trying to understand taste today, you'll still do a public opinion poll if you want to do it like best, but you'll also work with these companies that use data from Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
Facebook, and can up to the minute tell you based on adjectives surrounding certain words how people
Hmm.
feel about things, shoes, politicians, etc. And so the reason I brought in this book called The Bestseller Code
Yeah.
into the research was that it seemed like the equivalent of big data. They had used their own large language model to determine like the DNA of bestsellers and what was definitely not a bestseller by looking at 500 New York Times bestsellers.
Uh-huh.
And so they had this laundry list of like, do include moments of dating, you know, don't include reptile collecting, you know. Um, and so I just kind of infused data from that also to fill in what the poll couldn't answer. And if you're
Yeah.
looking on YouTube here, I have it's like a behind the music glimpse of how Catherine and I were sculpting the questions. It was basically a Excel spreadsheet that we were working on, and then programmed into Qualtrics,
Right.
and then used this company Prolific that had this like that's how we found the representative sample of the United States. And here's the representative sample of the United States. We have um, the respondents come from almost all 50 states.
Right.
There was
But the-
nobody in Alaska, Maine, Vermont, or the Dakotas, which might account for why polar regions were unwanted.
oh, that's true. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. They left totally left out. I'm surprised about Vermont. Dakota's not so surprised, but
Also, it just happened to be like, the way it works is that it's, kind of pinging people who have already been a part of this like sample. And,
yeah.
I guess because proportionally there are less people in those
Mhm.
states related to other states, it was still seen as like we could still claim uh, representation
Yeah.
based on that. Nothing's perfect. And also,
No.
this is also playing, it's also a bit of a parody of
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
data,
Yeah. It's-
So, but we did it all, we're doing it very serious jokes,
right. Right. Very serious joke is a perfect way to put it.
And so after we pulled the United States, we tallied the results, and I made this spreadsheet with most wanted qualities on one side and most unwanted, and this basically became the menu for the novels.
That's
Um, you
interesting.
can see here some of the research I said, like I need to read 50 Shades of Grey
Yep.
because people didn't want romance. Um,
Which is interesting. I want to come back to that in a second after you go through this.
yeah, I mean we could talk about it now,
Oh,
but
well, you could talk about, yeah. So the romance that shows up a few times in the book in terms of the data, and then within the sort of commentary that goes along with it that people didn't like. But that's the hottest thing right now.
I
And the
know,
the
yeah,
poll was in 2021.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was hot
So
then too.
right. So it's not that long ago. It's not, it seems that seems surprising to me because I mean you read every time a new romance bookstore opens up, there's an article about how line around the block, there's one that's just literally just down the road from me, like a baseball throw from here, that just opened that's a big romance bookstore. So I'm surprised by that part.
Right. Well, I have two theories.
But okay.
One is I remember in the 90s when I was like in grade school,
Mhm.
everybody hated country music.
Oh yeah.
It was like a thing. Everybody just
Yeah.
liked to say that. But the thing is, nobody had ever heard it. And even if they had, they hadn't heard like the good stuff, you know?
Yeah. That's
And
fair.
so I feel like maybe that romance has a little bit of that stigma, you know?
Yeah.
Because like any genre has good stuff in it. And in
Right.
fact, through my research, when I was researching thrillers, bestsellers, it like I found Dan Brown to be a slog, but I found this book, this like Wyoming Christian like romance to be the best thing I read. Like it
That's
was like
wild.
I like needed to know what like Timmy and Sal what happened to them. They did a good job.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
and the other thing, through thinking through this question with my partner and everything, we realized, romance is kind of seen as women's literature, and there's maybe some sexism around that.
That's true.
You
That's
know,
absolutely true. I think if you
um,
rename it romantasy too, it's a different category, right?
Right.
even if that's not really true. It's like at least feels like something different, and sort of like the way that Spotify invents new genres to make you a power user of that genre. There's like something like kind of appealing to being like, oh, I'm reading romantasy, not my mom's romance, no Harlequin. This is like cool.
Right. Well, and also to this, like, there's a contradiction because people didn't want romance, but the activity they most wanted was falling in love.
Right. Exactly.
So, um, people are sometimes we're confused.
And yeah, that was one of the things reading this. I was like, it's also interesting that if you extrapolate out of this data and create the sort of bubble where you only read the things that you want the most, it's weird because we don't really know what we want the most. And we don't get trained to want something other than that because if given this data all over to a publisher, they would want to like just hone in on what is the most popular, let's focus only here, and nobody would ever learn how to read anything other than what they're searching for. So it's all
Yeah.
I find it very curious from like that larger scale, which you get into a little bit in the book too.
And I should say, that's actually part of the publishing journey of this book.
I'm curious about that.
Um, Maybe I will just say a few things about that, since we brought it up, but like, there were 50 rejections over 11 months.
Mhm.
And the closest we ever got, there at the end, there were a few, it got a little bit better, but was a big five publisher.
Right.
Um, this one editor read The Most Unwanted and could not get through 100 pages,
Oh my
and in
God,
fact,
seriously?
yeah, and in fact, an editor of a big small press independent had the same problem around the polar region part. My
Oh,
partner had this problem, my agent, and so there's a disclaimer in the meta moments there where I'm like, I'm pretty sure all the early readings, like empirical data says that you want to stop here. So, and I just need to let you know it's going to get better, maybe, you know.
yeah, exactly.
So like that led to the criticism, but so that person said no, and then she sent The Most Wanted to her boss, and he did not tell him the conceit, and he was like, "This is like a really good thriller."
Wow.
And so they wanted to do just The Most Wanted, change the title to something else, and like
Yeah.
a month after publication, be like, "We tricked you," you know. This was
Ooh.
designed to make you want it, and so it's literally what you just said. It was that, and I said no to that because one, I didn't really want to trick people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
two,
Fair.
I thought that if they published The Most Wanted for just what you said, like The Most Unwanted might never see the light of day.
That's true.
So anyway,
Although you would
um,
in another alternate reality, you would be like this master thriller writer with like a whole series of books based around these sort of
no,
statistical
I mean,
analyses.
and well, we can talk about it, but I have some further thriller ideas now. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I learned the thing.
Pseudonyms are a great tool for a lot of
Yeah,
things
yeah.
too. Like, the,
All right, so let's see the actual data. We got the most genre. We already talked about romance being the most unwanted. The most wanted is a thriller or mystery,
makes sense.
specifically a techno thriller. Our data and the bestseller code point to that people want to read about fearful advanced technology.
Huh.
Um, in our data, it was like also advanced technology. It's about the meaning of the universe. Um,
Yeah.
and the most unwanted genre was romance, followed by horror, historical fiction, and classic literature. And so all three of those genres show up.
And horror is on a rise too, which makes that interesting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is the thing, these questions were a little different than the other ones where
Hmm.
people had the option. It said, what's your most wanted genre?
Yeah.
Okay, what's your second most wanted genre? So there were two separate questions.
Yep.
What's your most unwanted genre? What's your second most unwanted genre? So they did get the opportunity to do both.
Right.
But you're asked to pick one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you could actually be like, I like thrillers and horror. But when you're doing a poll, you're supposed to make it like super simple.
Yes.
That was what I
Yes.
learned from Johns Hopkins, Catherine,
Fascinating.
and her training.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So, and the topics, as mentioned, people want science and technology,
Hmm.
um, and they do not want religion or sports. And so, the most unwanted is basically about a Christian colony on Mars, and there's a lot of tennis.
Yep.
Um, and
Part of the
I,
wonderful picture on here.
Right. Yeah, yeah, right. Praising some strange being with tennis rackets. Um, and so yeah, for form, surprisingly, people 62% of people said they wanted traditional novels, 38% said they wanted experimental. And I say surprisingly because that's a lot of people.
Huge. That was one of the things that stood out to me. It was that, and there's a couple other numbers that you have in there where I was like, man, that's way closer than I thought it would be. Like I thought it would be tilted
Yeah.
like 85-15, not 62-38. And there's some other one that's like 54-46. I forget what it was specifically, but it's like, oh, that's remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, because also if you scale that to the adult population of the United States, that's like 100 million people, which
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
which makes you question. I mean, the other thing is maybe if you were to be asked like, do you like something traditional or experimental? Some people might be like, well, I don't want to say traditional. Like
Yeah, that's
I
tough.
like
I'm
surprise,
cool or I'm unique.
but the thing is they also the experimental they wanted was not like encyclopedic novels.
Hmm.
It was like um I can look specifically, but it was like non-linear plots
Yeah.
and maybe some abstraction in the
Right,
language.
right, right. So
But that's still anyway, yeah.
still something.
And the reason that in the graph that we have James Patterson and James Joyce here is that even though my partner says that doesn't look like James Joyce, I'm like whatever. Um, that James Patterson, I found in my research that at every opportunity he hates on James Joyce.
I had no
Um,
idea of that, and that stunned me. We made a joke about this on the earlier on the 2 month review this week about that because I was like, that's wild. Like, did they just hold
it's
a
like
grudge?
punching down
Yeah,
because like, he
seriously.
won literature.
Yeah. He's-
Um,
hold
but yeah, in his masterclass class and in this book of his I read, the store,
Mhm.
he makes an opportunity to hate on him. I think that James Patterson seems to have a complex where he's not seen as like an artist enough,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
James Joyce is seen as like the artist of the novel. But yeah, he calls him a sleep aid, I think, in the store, and so I do this also in the most wanted. Um, and here we have our characters. Um, for the most wanted, we have Alex Finn as the protagonist.
Yeah.
She is a straight white woman. And the reason
Hmm.
she's white, the ethnicity question was inconclusive. 90% of people had no preference.
Yeah.
And so I looked to like my bestseller research at the time. I looked like the New York Times bestseller list. It was like a lot of novels by white people about white characters.
Yeah.
And actually in keeping with the most wanted of the most wanted novels from the bestseller code,
Hmm.
um, they found that David Eggers' The Circle was like the ultimate. That was
That
crazy
blew
to
my
me, right?
mind. I'm pretty sure I have that book, but it was in my daughter's room, and I think she read it, and for some reason, I think she said she really liked it, which is unusual
Yeah,
within like
yeah.
her scheme of reading. And I meant to ask her about this, and I forgot. But like, yeah, that one was like, really? That I don't even remember that being a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it became a movie, so it's
Yeah,
like,
I'm sure, sure.
yeah, yeah. But it was just like what the computer said.
Yeah.
It had the perfect combination of everything. And so in a weird way, The Most Wanted is kind of like the same story.
Uh-huh.
Um, um, anyway, we can talk about more of that later, but it just made me think that Alex Finn and the protagonist in that book are very similar.
That's really cool.
Um, Adult comes from a working class background, like the protagonist of
Yeah.
The Circle. She falls in love, works a 9 to 5 job at a tech company. She has good morals, and her story is told in the third person.
Yeah.
And on the other side here, we got Lord Jimothy Tickletext. Uh, his sexuality is other. It was like, the fill in the blank option.
Right.
We kind of cannot really tell what's going on with him throughout. At first, we think he's straight, but then he's like making out with guys and like dates a
Yeah.
lot of non-binary and transgender people. Um, uh, his when people said they did have a preference for an ethnicity, the least one it was the fill in the blank there. And the answers that people most coalesced around were non-American and fantastical beings. And in a way, he is that.
He's kind of both. Yeah. Yeah.
He's from Mars. He wasn't. Wait, was he? I guess he was born in
Yeah.
on Earth. But anyway, he's fantastical in that, as we see down here, he has an unreal age. He's like 160 years old.
Exactly.
Um, he's a man. His friends are a lot of queer characters. He's aristocratic and he loves tennis. That's his activity. He has questionable morals. Um, and his story is told in the second person.
which
you.
is wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow I pulled that off for
I,
like
I was gonna say
hundreds
that
of
was quite a
pages.
feat to do that. Like just as a whole, that you deserve accolades just for being able to do that and not make it like super dry. There are only like a handful of books that I remember really enjoying that are of that nature. Like there's a Michel Butor book, Change of Heart, that second person that I think is really cool.
Ah.
But yeah, it's very rare. I remember as a kid reading Tom Robbins wrote a book in the second person. I think that was the last book of his I ever read, and I was just like, no, I'm out. Broke
I
me.
mean, this could be the end for me too. Who knows?
I don't think so.
Um,
I highly doubt that.
well, the other thing is I think it helped that throughout there are these stories within stories that don't do that.
Yeah,
You
that's very
get a
true.
break. You get a
Yep.
break from the second person.
Yep.
And so the worlds we have here are people want realistic literature. They don't want unrealistic. Um, they want a large city. And I noticed that in thriller novels, they usually travel between two cities.
Yeah.
So I did LA and San Francisco, um, mainly because like the tech connection
Yep.
of both cities. Unrealistic. They don't want rural regions, and they don't specifically don't want polar. So it basically that added to like the winter time. I don't say it in the date in the they didn't want 1 day. So cold space 1 day plus religion equaled Christmas Eve.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yep.
that's
Yep.
how that came about. And then yeah, they of the unwanted, sorry, the unrealistic characters, they at least wanted talking animals, extraterrestrials, and
Agree
sentient
with that.
robots. And
I,
so,
I hate talking animals in books. We get a lot of submissions that have a talking animal, and I've told like my students and anyone that will listen, like absolutely, we will never publish a book with a talking animal. I hate it. Like,
wow, that we really, you're the first person who's said that. I mean, I think I have an aversion to that too. Although now reading a lot of children's stories, like I'm constantly,
I feel like
um,
that's a different. I feel like that's
it's
different.
different. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Different, like an
yeah, yeah.
adult book. Like,
Yeah, I mean, and this one really hams that up. So,
yep, yeah, it's a super
um,
fun. And yeah, it's
oh,
funny
sorry.
because all the things you would say are unwanted within the context of the most unwanted novel, which we can get into the specifics later, are super fun and super enjoyable. I'm surprised to go back to what you said before about the people not getting past that first 100 pages, because that was about the point where I was like texting all my friends, being like, if you haven't read this, I think you're gonna think this is super cool. Like I'm
Oh,
way
cool.
in
Yeah.
on this. So, and I thought
I
that
mean, Chad, we might have some, seems like we have some literary interests. So
was,
this
yeah,
might,
that's true.
do I have a novel for you? Yeah, yeah. Oh, and so like pretty much I'm almost done with this part of the
Oh yeah, no
presentation, but
worries.
there were some cultural revelations. I thought this was very interesting that 90% of Americans want some level of violence.
Yeah,
91, sorry. Of course, only 4% want a lot of violence.
fair.
But anyway, I feel like that is a little revelatory about
This
maybe
is
where we're at.
something. I think so too.
Although I would be interested to pull other countries.
Yeah, I would be curious about that as well because like even when you think of like thrillers from in translation from other countries, there is at least some violence or the threat of violence that goes beyond like what the
Hmm.
normal within that what's actually exists within. I'm thinking of Iceland in particular. Like Icelandic thrillers will have like a certain amount of violence, but there really isn't that level in the country. So there must be something to that from like a readerly perspective. But I can't imagine anyone's like as like into violence as Americans.
Yeah. No, but this, I mean, I do have an interest, talking about translation. Like, I would love for a translation to restage the whole thing in another country
That'd be
and like
so
work with
cool.
another writer to just, it might be a totally different story, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Probably would. Although, as they've Comar Melamed found, they found pretty common data.
Hmm.
So anyway, and then yeah, basically the last slide here I have is like, how did I become two novelists? And if you're not looking at home,
You should.
there's two photographs of me kind of here where I had Midjourney, the AI image app, turn a photograph of me into the most wanted author and the most unwanted author. And I didn't even say non-binary, but like uh
It-
when talk about AI bias. My image, the photo I had was a little bit had some non-binary vibes.
uh-huh.
So the most wanted is a more masculine version of me, and the most unwanted is a even more non-binary version of me. So
It's so funny.
um yeah, I just said unwant the author, make it a most wanted author photo, and so yeah, so basically to become these two novelists, as I said, I looked at these masterclass classes by Dan Brown, David Baldacci, James Patterson, and several others. I read like Danielle Steele, Janet Ivanovich, and a bunch of these guys above, and a lot more. And then the most unwanted, I'd read a lot of like weird fiction in both senses of the word, like horror literature, because there's this collection of horror stories that shows up in the middle, and just like Dalkey Archive,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, exactly.
like
Yep.
the best of the, whatever weird, we can talk about. It's a
And the
um
Kathy Acker references. Love the Kathy Acker references.
yeah, yeah. And oh, and just like, I guess this is one last like, good thing to round out how this was written. I didn't sometimes when you do a poll, you don't realize how important some questions are until you've done the poll.
Yeah.
And I really did not think much about this question, but became so instrumental in the most unwanted. The question was, if you had unlimited resources and could commission your favorite author to write a novel just for you, what would it be about? Um, and most people said things around genre lines, like
Mhm.
romance, maybe romantasy or, horror thriller combos. But some people said things like, ta talking cats taking over Earth and getting rid of our useless governments, um, or the frame narrative of the story, which was about a two people meeting on Christmas Eve morning and realizing that they had loved ones who died on the same day, and then the whole novel is about the man trying to find her, which just became the story of the book.
Right.
Um, and even things like the heart like the Squonk horror story came out of somebody said I want a queer nonviolent horror story about folkloric creatures that bring everybody together.
Yeah.
And I was researching American folkloric creatures. I discovered the Squonk, which was this basketball-sized, lumpy, weepy creature who's always crying. Um, and so much so that if it's in danger, it can cry and like teleport, like dissolve into
Wow.
tears. And so I fell in love with this monster. It's like kind of like I actually kind of want to write a children's story about the
That
Squonk now.
that would be great.
Um, I'm I'm in the middle of it. I just need
Good,
the
good,
time.
good.
So anyway, so all that, yeah, these questions really helped fill out, when I had to fill in hundreds of pages and I didn't want it to just be totally off the dome.
Hmm.
These became plot points. There was something about dinosaurs skating with tech decks, and so a salvia trip becomes this like answer that somebody gave to this question.
Exactly.
Um, and if you're also looking at home, basically I'm showing that there was collage was a big part of the production too. Um, these are uh,
Same.
I had gone through all these books and like tried to find like language patterns also and how people write thrillers. This is a
Hmm.
what you're seeing here is our dog around. Um, a lot of patterns in narrative plot points, but also, yeah, like the fact that people say if you don't just say car, you say Ford Fusion.
Right. That
You
was
don't.
that was fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and um, and yeah, just the endless repetition of tourist sites in Dan Brown novels at the beginning of each chapter, stuff
That
like
too, and I
that.
mentioned this in the email, but when you reference a lot of that stuff, so in the Most Wanted novel, the preface to that, you talk a little bit about how you talk about what you just talked about, more or less, in terms of like putting things together, what the poll was, so on and so forth, and some of the things that you noticed. And then the Most Wanted novel is, like you said, a tech thriller. With Alex Finn, her brother is framed for for stealing secrets. There's a new release of a program that's going to take over all total surveillance. There's a FBI agent she sort of has a crush on. It all becomes like pretty not like it's sort of a standard thriller, which is kind of what it's supposed to be. But like also I have to well, there's two things. One was I really love the Slow Horses TV show from Apple and the Slough House book series. And they have a new one coming out in September. So I've been like racing to finish to catch up because this is like relatively new to me. And
Yeah.
after reading your book, as I'm reading your book and I'm listening to this, and you're referring to like the sites that happen and get explained at the beginning of each chapter, there's frequently like a couple paragraphs saying like this building was built in blah 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 and features blah 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 blah. Every Slough House book begins with the description of that location where the
Hmm.
MI5 outcasts live or like work. And so it'll describe that building. There's various things that describe things. There's something else that you referenced. Can't think of now, but I started listening to the next chapter and it was bang on exactly what you had just talked about as being like one of these common bits within the thriller world. And so I was kind of fascinated by like how in reading that, like my inclination for obvious reasons, working at Delkey, open letter, all my like reading, all the things we do is tilted towards what would be considered the most unwanted novel, the experimental stuff, the strange stuff, the weird fiction, the like experiments with form and style and the endless repetition that's not repeating like, oh, she remembers Timmy, her first kiss that like ended badly. I think that was his name. Might have been
Yeah, yeah,
um, like that sort of repetition, but the repetition that plays with like, Gertrude Stein and that sort of thing. And then reading the Most Wanted novel, I'm like 50 pages in, not far into it at all. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm staying up tonight and reading this whole thing. Like, I need to know where this goes. I want to know why. And I kept feeling this interrogating bit to reading it where it's like, why do I like this? Like, this is like essentially supposed to be the stuff that I don't like. And yet
mm,
it works incredibly well. And it makes you question, like, what is it about this form that works so well? What is it that like makes you want to know? And I have to say, like, conversely, and I'll come up with a question after this, but
yeah,
conversely, the Most Unwanted novel had a similar vibe. Whereas, like, for a long time, I'm like, this is meant to be prickly, meant to put you off of it, meant to like start and stop and interrupt itself, both through there is within the Unwanted novel, just for anyone who hasn't read this yet, there is like you interjecting, Tom Comitta interjecting into the text itself, explaining like why things are the way they are, referring back to the data, sort of like guiding it as a whole. So there is that, but even and that interrupts. But beyond that, within different sections, it'll interrupt itself and switch in different ways. Like the VR like Inception like sequence where he's trying to find the answer to like where this character is and
right.
goes through like these world after world and trying to find like the secret to get to the next world, to get to the next world, to get to the next VR world. Like it keeps like interrupting itself and causing you to like be like, well, I'm not following this anymore, essentially. Like my singular plot line that I really liked in the Most Wanted novel that had that momentum to it is now all over the place. And yet, even within that, there is still that compelling, like, I want to keep going with this. I
Mm,
want to see what this whole thing is a form, which I think is a testament to your writing
mm.
of it, but also is like just something interesting about the way that novels function, I think. And the Most Wanted one shocked me as terms of like how much I liked it. Some of it I was like, this is so cheesy and like so clearly like like one of these books, but I kind of dig it within this context a
Yeah, yeah.
lot.
Well,
So
I mean,
I
as I say at the introduction, I'm like, I was rooting for like I put I wanted each to have a fighting chance to like win you over. So, um, yeah, and also personally, if I'm tired, I would want to read a wanted novel too.
yeah.
There's or just or maybe not even tired. Certain days,
Hmm.
weeks, months, my tastes change.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think that part of the point is that all these different approaches can learn from each other, and really benefit.
Agreed.
Although there are times where I was like, yeah, I mean, having chase scenes in the Most Unwanted, I was like, is this too, it's too wanted, like I don't know.
I need to
I
make
mean,
this worse, or like not worse is the wrong word, but like least less wanted, less desired.
yeah, I mean, I don't, the point was to like kind of play different taste heartstrings or whatever.
Mhm.
And at certain moments try to really, really repulse, you know. Um, but overall, I don't know. I forget how Dave Solder puts it because he's saying it's not like the worst song ever. It was just a collection of things that were deemed unwanted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I did want to have fun. I want people to read it. Like all these books that I write, like on paper, should be unreadable, like the nature book.
Right. Which do you want to
Yeah.
explain the premise behind the nature book? Because I don't want to do it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. The nature book is basically a supercut, I call it,
Mhm.
of nature's a collage of nature descriptions from 300 other novels collaged into one novel that's just nature for about 300 pages.
Yep.
And it's like an archive, but it's also a story that travels from the four seasons to oceans, islands, jungles, outer space, prairies, mountains, and deserts. It's literally structured in that way. And with each, it's basically like a mood collage that people said was a page turner, uh, because I tried to make it
Yeah.
readable, because like I said, on 300 pages of nature descriptions. That's like literally part of the idea at first was to collect everything that people skim over and see what it would reveal.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and even the most unwanted, most wanted, like, they have these concepts, but I feel like it's my job. I want people to like get their money, not just get their money's worth, but like enjoy themselves, While I was
Right.
editing the most wanted, I was just like, I just wanted to make experience where essentially we're going to be hanging out for a few hundred pages, so let's have some fun. And
Yes.
that's where in the editing also I think that part of the pleasure of the most unwanted is that I think I just worked really hard to get the music right in
Oh,
both books. And I think that's maybe also what makes the most unwanted like work better.
interesting. So with the music, the people listening to this will have heard the Bruno Mars song. You said there's a story behind this. So
Right. By the way, I meant music metaphorically or like
right,
rhythm of the
rhythmic, like
language.
the
Yeah,
music of
yeah.
I'm gonna go. I sorry, I'm jumping into that because
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
mentioned
No,
in the
no, no.
story. But
Segue,
yeah, like
segue. Yeah, yeah.
there is also kind of the like musical within like the lines themselves, which all Unwanted and Wanted both read great. Like they're very well crafted lines. And I want to come back to that in a second. But there is sort of like that, there's always that attempt, or at least people talk about it, especially with like more experimental novels of creating like a orchestral sort of sound collage that is more structured like music. This is a very, very common theme. And it does sort of because it does like shift gears so frequently, like what you're saying with the most unwanted song, where it's like a collection of like these little bits. When you go from like the sci-fi VR part to horror to like this other, like you're
Robin Hood, whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
Robin Hood, you're going all over the place in terms of like tonality and like what you're doing. So it has that kind of feel. And with the motifs that keep coming back, you've got that bit. So it is more musical. But you do also have this Bruno Mars song,
Right.
which I've never heard. I still haven't heard it. I just tagged it as like this will be the music for this. I'm not a Bruno Mars fan, so I'm like out on this one. But
Yeah, yeah.
what's the story?
Okay, well, so in a weird way, the most unwanted is the most autobiographical thing I've written in that, like, I am not Lord Tickletext.
Okay.
Um, I have a day job, like, whatever. I don't live on
You're
Mars.
not an aristocrat? You're not
No,
170?
no. But you know, somebody asked in the VR part, for instance, like somebody asked for an American Revolution, like a somebody kind of rising to political power. I
Yeah.
happened to grow up near the Battle of the Brandywine in this town called Westchester, Pennsylvania. So I decided to like set it in my hometown.
Yeah.
Or um that's the one I think of the most. But then the other thing was that Bruno Mars's Marry You. Um, I don't know, 7 years ago, there was a YouTube video of like a really elaborate proposal where Bruno Mars's Marry You was played, and all the friends of the people proposing to each other did basically like a live musical on the street. It's in some suburban space to Bruno Mars Marry, and that ends with a proposal. And Dea and I, my partner, watched this before we were engaged, whatever. And it's so campy over the top, it like made us cry. It was so
Oh,
sweet.
man.
And so when I proposed to Dea, I put it on.
Nice.
As we went to this is super personal, but whatever. It's a fun story. There's this beach, we were going to Big Sur,
Okay.
and there's this beach in Big Sur that I don't know, it just seemed beautiful. There was like rocks and everything. And somebody had told me it was really windy on this beach. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a kite and write "Marry Me" on it, question mark.
Right.
And I'm gonna go on that beach. I'm gonna be like hide somewhere, and I'm gonna say, turn on my phone when you see something. And it was like, marry you.
Yeah.
There was no wind that day. So, so like a lunatic, I'm like running around trying to get this kite in the air as our dog is like trying to bite it, and Mary You's playing. Anyway, so
Amazing.
the reason this is coming up, if you've not read the book yet, is at some point the whole story is about Lord Tickletext trying to find this woman he met in the morning. He eventually gets to her door, maybe, and decides that he's going to play Bruno Mars's "Marry You" as he walks up, just because over the top, like obviously he just wants to marry her on the first day or whatever.
After a short
So
meeting.
I don't know, just you know, there's a lot of data, but there were some
It's
other slippages of, you know, self or whatever.
The Big Sur reference is funny because that's a key moment within the Most Wanted novel too.
Big Sur? Wait.
The book.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Yep,
And
yep, yep.
actually, I was thinking, no, because they don't go there, but yeah,
No.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And actually, I was thinking when you were talking about your interest uh in the Most Wanted, I do feel like that clue is
Yes.
kind of candy for unwanted readers.
I think you're right.
It's a reference to there's a I won't get into like the answer, but there's a reference all wanted thrillers need like a puzzle, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
actually, and that was like an original. I mean, I don't know if wait, did it work on you? Did you not know it was
It
about?
did because I
Really?
read it several
Okay.
times and I was like, what could this be? That was one of the points where I was hooked and I was like, I am now like it's reflecting now. Like, what are the things that I like? What are the things that are compelling to me? This is one of them, and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
ties into the Slough House stuff too, in the sense that like those are all like MI5 thriller mysteries where you're like, what is happening here, and you got to figure out something. And like things with codes are great. I love that kind of
yeah, yeah.
stuff. So like having like a puzzle where you're like the answer is in here, but I don't know what it is. I have to wait for like the book to like tell me at the end what it might be. That was great. So yeah, I'm not
Okay,
that's not
cool.
give it
Yeah, yeah,
away
yeah.
because
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like given what the references what it how it like unpacks itself and they're ones that like or I know and a lot
Yeah,
of people
yeah.
that would be of our ilk will know. It's like,
Right.
oh, this is great. Like you really did like in a way trick us.
Well, I think we can say it's about Jack Kerouac.
Okay, yeah, we
I
can
think
say it's
that's
a
not going to
check.
give
Okay,
um that doesn't give it away, I don't
right.
think.
I don't think so either.
But yeah, so I don't know. I yeah, I and also I don't know if there are some Easter eggs that kind of connect both stories throughout. So
Yes.
that was also part of like just trying to make a rich experience that isn't just concept or whatever, you
And
know?
that's why I think of it as three books,
Um,
as like that kind of
mm.
overarching thing is like that
Oh,
there
right.
is that kind of guidance that makes this one project rather than if you had gone with the big five publisher and split it up into two, it would have been kind of weird to read it as only two books because it's that like I try and talk about this in my class sometimes and I don't know like how much I even believe in it, but like the great books like create a consciousness of themselves. Like you feel the
Mhm.
book as you go, and the book's consciousness in this sense is all of it, not just those pieces. They're not
Right.
like a brick wall between them. They do have those motifs that go along. In terms of the writing, though, did you write this within an LLM model as well? And how did that play into like the construction of I guess, on the line level, even?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so um the writing so the poll happened in early December 2021.
Right,
At that point, the only LLMs to my mind that were available was this playground,
right.
this OpenAI playground. Um, and it's a totally different interface than ChatGPT. Have you ever tried it? Have you ever seen
Oh,
this?
I've not used the playground, but I use ChatGPT.
Yeah. So
I have.
basically, it's a text box instead
Okay.
of a chat
Yeah.
experience. Um, at that time, it was like you would be in this box, you would put in a few paragraphs. I mean, you could just say like, write me a short story.
Yeah.
But the way I mostly used it would be like I would write a few paragraphs. And as I say in the book, like maybe 20% of the most unwanted began this way, like 5% of the most wanted. Mostly the tourist descriptions,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Of course, of course.
which I did have to edit because their facts were wrong,
That's the
like
worst part of
AI.
this all. I mean,
Oh
best
yeah.
and worst. It's like, well, the AI thing is like taking over the world and also like lying constantly.
Yeah,
This
and then it's
happened
like
the other day.
learning
I have
from
a funny
itself.
story about that.
What
That
what is it?
so there's a book that we're coming out with called The City by Lara Moreno, translated from the Spanish. And there's a reference in there to a line from Elizabeth Smart. And so I immediately was like, well, this is from outside of Grand Central Station. I sat down and wept. And I was like, let me make sure that the translator hadn't just back translated this, right? Let me find the right quote. And so I
Hmm.
start searching. There, it does not exist. I go back to the book. I get an e version of the book to be able to like do a fine, not there, not there, not there, not there, not there. Finally, like I'm asking her the other day, she's looking, she's like, I don't know where, because it's referenced in the novel. It's from a particular book that does exist. So at some point, we're like, oh, we can just get this book and figure it out. But before we got to that point, I put into ChatGPT, where does this quote come from? And it said it comes from these diaries written in 1945 by Sylvia Plath. And I was like, what? I was like, that's not right. And so I was like, I texted that to the translator. I was like, okay, so apparently it's this. Maybe we've got the author wrong. That's why we're misled. It's not Elizabeth Smart, it's Sylvia Plath. And I was like, but Sylvia Plath didn't write any diaries in 1945. That doesn't exist. And it had
Right.
hallucinated. It was Elizabeth Smart's diaries, is very specific to like this one entry. And it got that off the jump, but it had the completely wrong author for whatever reason, even though clearly the book is that book. So
Yeah, yeah.
those kind of hallucinations are like the thing that I think are both like interesting. Like how does a machine come to that this weird conclusion where it puts two things together that don't make any sense? But then also like the most dangerous because that's the part that gets replicated. And like we end up saying
Yeah.
things like, "Oh, well, this is like true. I saw it online." And you're like, "No, no, no, that's totally not true. You're seeing an AI thing that seeped into other places and been replicated." So, yeah, so that's not surprising that with the descriptions you had to you had to fact check the
Yeah,
computer.
fact check them, edit them. But also, like, and to the criticism, like, we can talk about the criticism, like, obviously the carbon footprint, like, really
Yeah,
needs to
that's the bad
be
part. That's the part I'm scared of.
uh resolved. But I also think that the way this has gone since 2021, where like I feel like introducing the chatbot dynamic, the fact that we
Mhm.
all need assistance, like that the text box, it really felt kind of collaborative. And
Yeah,
at least like higher, like something about that relation where I know you're not supposed to say please and thank you because it uses a lot of energy,
which I do
but
automatically.
yeah, I mean, being a polite person. But I don't know, there's just something politically like weird about how they're guiding it. We all need assistance. Isn't robot, doesn't it come from the word slave? I
Oh,
think
does it?
I'm pretty sure. So anyway, whatever. So doing playing I guess just back to like the playground thing. Like
Yeah,
basically I would put in a paragraph, it would continue the thought in my voice.
yeah.
And then it would, I think either my languages was bold or its was bold, but you could see who was who.
Uh-huh.
And you could edit it live in there, maybe cut out parts you didn't like. So it was really like felt collaborative
Yeah.
with this thing, as I talk in the introduction, like this kind of polyvocalic, like super brain that had read all of literature. So I felt like it added this polyvocality to the writing,
True.
me being this singular person playing with all these different people's tastes. Um, so that's why I did it. And then, but yeah, it needed a lot of editing. I found it to be pretty good at genre writing.
I love
Um,
that.
uh, and and yeah, and it was instrumental. I mean, at this level of the line, a lot of the language had to be changed. Although back then also
Hmm.
the glitching was amazing.
Oh,
Like,
I'll bet.
um, how it would just start repeating things, and that's kind of where the repetition began. Although I really love novels that do this visual repetition that shows up a bunch.
Yep. Yep.
Um, uh, it would start glitching and just repeating like lovey puff puff, lovey puff 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 puff.
No way. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I just like kept those glitches in. Um, and so that was interesting at the level of like the line. Also talk about hallucinating. Um, Towards the end of the book, I was like, I have like 100 or so pages left to go. I need to like, I don't know where this is going. We've already got to midnight. It's supposed to be one day. Um, what else can happen? And I forget if I asked it like, I was basically collaborating with the LLM on, yeah, on this scene in the cathedral. And it said all of a sudden that she was part of the Merry Men. And I was like,
Right.
Merry Men, what is, oh my God, that's it, you
Yeah.
know? Um, and it's Robin Hood. It's from,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, that was, I mean, I also, in the years before I started writing this, I did tabletop games for the first time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'd never done them. Have you ever done them? Like
No,
Dungeons and Dragons?
very, 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 very small period. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It really changed my idea on narrative on the fixity of a novel. that when a novel is published, it moves in one direction, unless it's choose your own adventure.
Right, right.
Um, but it was just so fun to live create stories that could have gone in any direction based on the roll of a dice or like what your
Mhm.
friends are saying. And this felt like a little bit like a tabletop game, like where what is Mary? Like rolling the dice. She's a merry man, you know. Or
Right.
literally I would roll the dice. I think like there's a chase scene where Lord Harrison and Quinine, I think her name, are fleeing this like feline terrorist dungeon. And the things that they were jumping over, I would be like, what are they jumping over? You know, and it would just tell me different things.
Oh, that's
Um,
really interesting too.
felt like a little bit like a digital roll of the dice where it was
Hmm.
hallucinating. It could be anything.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, just in a lot of these books, these like constraint-based books, I'm really interested in like what these systems can produce more than maybe what I can add to it. Of course, as I said, there's some biographical elements, and
Yeah.
also there are things that I'm probably not even aware of yet that like I put into it that is like me.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, I've just been really interested in how like these systems produce things. And I guess before I used AI, when I described like the nature book to somebody maybe 8 months after GPT came out, they called me like human AI. Because in a
Right.
way, like the nature book's like an algorithmic novel
Yeah.
that was physically collaged together.
It's
So.
one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about that and this whole project is, do you remember Quentin Rowan? And the
Mhm.
story about for anyone who doesn't know, he'd been gotten a two-book deal, I believe it was, to write essentially like two thrillers. And the first one came out, and almost immediately Ed Champion cottoned on to the fact that there were a lot of pieces that were lifted from other sources. And it had turned out that he had like been like a human AI. This is back in like, I don't know, 2005 or something. Like it's many
Yeah,
years
yeah.
ago, so predates all this kind of stuff. But he was like this like specific sort of genius where everything that he read he could remember. So if he needed like description of someone walking across the lawn, he'd go to that book from his bookshelf, find a line, and put that line into his book. So it was like that kind of collage mentality that we've struggled with as a sort of like aesthetic for a while, where people are like the remix idea, the kind of like what you do with the collage, like that idea of like what is this plagiarism or is this like creation? Like it all feels a little bit like that argument feels a little bit dated right now in some weird way. But it also like with Quentin specifically, I kept thinking like this is, I mean, if ChatGPT existed at that point in time, it would be that was what it would be. Like you could just do that very easily now in a way that like I don't think people would be as like knee jerk reactionary like oh this doesn't count anymore. We've shifted like what those where the goalposts are in such a huge way.
Yeah, and it's interesting because yeah, it shifted, and also just and the paradigm has shifted. I was talking to John Ledecker, who goes by Wobbly. He's a collage. He's part of Negative Land at this
Yeah.
point.
Yep. Yep.
Um, I met him the other day, and he's been working on a history of sampling music
That's super
for
cool.
the University of or MACBA in Barcelona.
Okay.
And I guess he's been doing like decades and stuff. And for a while, he said he didn't know when it would end. And then AI came around. He's like, it's over.
Huh.
That sampling is done, and that this AI stuff has changed, like what I guess experimental artists will do. And I said, if it's over, what's next? He said, I don't know, statistics. Um,
Wow.
and so he actually is going to finish his series. And so it made me think about what you're saying about Quentin Rowan and like and this collage work. I guess it feels, you know, I don't know if I read this essay about the history of collage fiction. No pressure to have seen it, but as a when before I started to write my own novels, even though this one was um, not it's partially not written by me originally, when
Right.
I was doing like the nature book and patchwork, um, on one hand I was interested in like the history of found language fiction.
Hmm.
On the other, um, I caught wind, when I was trying to publish the nature book, no agents wanted to touch it because it was all plagiarized.
Right.
Um, I had met Coffee House Press randomly when I was working on a musical in Minneapolis,
Hmm.
hoping that they would be interested. And they were interested, but I had also caught wind that they were worried about copyright stuff. So I turned my amateurish interest in the history of found language fiction into like I need to like do some research and maybe show them that legally this is going to be okay. So I made
Yeah.
this bibliography of like 100 novels and short stories that were made out of found language. And I think several of them were Dalkey. I mean, like Walter Abish, you know. Oh
Right.
no,
Yeah.
wait. That was no, that was New
That's
Directions.
Delta
Sorry.
Two
Yeah, yeah.
Directions, but it's
Anyway.
same vein.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and also like, Flann O'Brien books.
And the one that comes to mind most in reading this is Mulligan Stew, which we did
Oh, right.
as a 2 and 3 review. That is, in many ways, fits this so well as like a companion piece in the sense that if you don't know Mulligan Stew, there's a writer who's trying to write like this big, amazing book, but in this case, he's a really shitty writer. But he writes like you get all these excerpts of like the novels that he's trying to write that all ties together, but it's like very different genres. All of them are like taken to the extreme and like done in ways that are like bad so that his characters want to like revolt and escape because he's killing them slowly. So it does seem like it sort of fits where it's like the most unwanted stuff. Sorrentino's has that unwanted part, but without like a different balance to it.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm pretty sure that was on the list.
I bet it was.
But
Yeah, 'cause that makes sense.
and actually, so yeah, the two routes of the thought here, like making the document for Coffee House,
Mhm.
I sent them the bibliography of these books and Quentin Rowan's book. I said, of these 100 books, only three of them had legal trouble, and it's when they hid the fact that they
Yes.
had used found language, and his was one of those examples. Kathy Acker also had some trouble um,
Right.
with a Tom Robbins book, maybe. I forget
I
who it
I
was.
forget who it was too, but yeah, that's in that biography that you sort of cite as well, that eat your mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that
Um,
popping up in there, but I can't remember the details.
yeah, but oh, and so it was writing the bibliography and then writing the essay that explained it that got Coffee House to say yes.
Oh,
So
that's really interesting.
so it was like the most useful bibliography I've ever written or heard of. I don't know. It was uphill battle. But so anyway, so all that to say with the wobbly note and being
Yeah.
somebody who's like been a collage writer, and there are several others
Uh-huh.
contemporaries who are still doing this. With the AI shift, like I wonder if something similar, like to have been writing this collage stuff at the end. I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Would
That's really
why would
curious.
you why would you collage found language when you could just collage the styles with AI or something? If you were gonna do that,
I made this
I
joke. I
don't
was
know.
in Poland on an editorial trip a couple weeks ago, and this Finnish publisher that was it Finnish or Danish? It was Danish. Danish publisher is talking about like things that they do that are wildly successful, and they're nothing related to literature, right? They're like books for like bridesmaids to fill out at their bridal shower, like things about like when you're having your first baby, all kinds of like stuff. And he's like, we really wanted to do one of those cat calendars where it's pictures of cats with like quotes about cats from famous writers, but like the getting all the rights and everything is a nightmare. It's so complicated. It's like, dude, you just AI that right away. Like, make me 52 photos of cats doing cat things, and then create like, give me a quote from Nabokov about cats. It'll just generate whatever. Nobody's
Yeah,
going to check it. Like, and if they do, they're like, you're violating copyright. Be like, doesn't exist, yo. Like, it's
right,
not. It's a different Nabokov. It's like so you could, yeah. So you're right. Like everything is switched from like collage almost to like hallucination. Like there's
right,
something weird happening at this moment in terms of those kind of things. Like Kathy Acker in this world does seem like a little strange now, like as you think about it that way.
right. And yet, also I personally I've I become more and more allergic to, even though I've used it, like I just want like a physical book now, or um
100%. And like the authenticity is going to become really big, I think, over
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Like even if it is like a collage based work, but knowing that it's from like a viewpoint or a person that is not invented, I think will have more resonance as we go forward in this like chaotic world. Where I saw something, I don't know where it was, maybe it was the New York Times today even, where it was like most people can't distinguish anymore between what's AI and what's not in terms of like fake videos and fake photographs. The whole like 12 finger thing is gone, and now
right,
it's like so close that you're like, I can't really tell the difference.
yeah,
Which I think is interesting and scary. I mean, So one of the reasons I was very interested in talking to you too in relation to this book is it doesn't read like that. Like it doesn't
Mm,
read like what we associate with like AI writing, where like everything kind of comes to the middle. Like its whole idea is to like, be the most palatable and the most simple. And even if you play with ChatGPT and are like, write me X, and then are like, write it in the style of a seventh grader, blah, blah, and it can do that, it still has like some level of like simplicity or like directness that's not that you can like I hope, and I might be wrong about this, but I hope that if you're reading it, you can sense that it's not completely human, that there's something a little bit off when it's purely generated. Your book does not read like that at all.
right.
Like it reads clearly like you wrote it, and
Yeah.
we're writing within these modes. And I can see like from how you describe it in the book and here, how you would use it as a tool, how you could use that to like help guide you towards like what is the most cliched way of saying this versus like the sort of Schlossskian estrangement version of this. Like that makes total sense, but so it doesn't feel like that, but it's interesting. It's all strange times.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that might be, I feel like I wrote over a lot of it. Like
Oh,
there might have been a base coat that maybe if I were to like have hovered over my shoulder, what's there now is very, very distantly connected to what was there when it was first generated. I
right.
did several edits. I don't really know how to think about this totally, but James Patterson, going back to him, you know, he hasn't written a novel in like a decades, right? I mean,
No.
and he has the luxury of paying a human. I'm not saying. I guess I just wondered about like the class aspect of. I mean, obviously we're dealing with like big companies,
Hmm.
but um, sometimes people don't have money for an editor. People don't have money for, and to have like an extra eye. Even not the actual writing, but just you know just a somebody to ask. I mean, I don't know. It's not perfect, and I definitely am not 100% on board, but actually one thing that I found to be very helpful for was a thesaurus.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
When I was, there's so much like music language play.
Yep.
If I'm like, what's a word that means music that starts with B and rhymes with like cat?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
before that, like it would have taken me a half an hour at least to find that.
100%.
And sometimes they gave me fake words, but I found that to be helpful.
True.
So,
That's the way that the same translator we had this problem with used ChatGPT for this very experimental novel Attila that we published by Alyosha Cole, which is like basically almost incomprehensible. It's like very wild. You can sort of figure out, you can have an idea of what your reading is on it, but it truly is like way out there. He was pretty like having struggles mentally at the time, ends up killing himself. Like it is
oh wow.
so it's that version of experimental where it's like for you alone almost, right?
Mhm.
And there are a lot of things in there where she's like, this is archaic Spanish that I don't have any clue. And it's not showing up in like dictionaries frequently because they're like too modern. And ChatGPT did help in like as like that encyclopedic thesaurus sort of version of things of like, what is this mean? Like, what is, and it would give her like certain clues to help. Like, it never really did a translation, but it was like that sort of usefulness of like, oh, here's where the roots are. Here's what it means. Here's where it says ancient fish, and all of a sudden, or ancient term for fish. And all of a sudden, she's like, oh, this whole paragraph is fish related terms, but a
Mm,
lot of them are, from 1400s Spanish, not anything that anyone knows today. So, very
that's
wild.
helpful. Yeah.
The only thing that stood out to me, here we go, baseball question. I told you one was
Yeah,
coming.
let's do it. Yeah, yeah.
The only thing that stood out to me in the whole book as like a question of like, or I was like, wait a second, and I got pulled out of it, is that on page 167, you have a curveball thrown at 90 miles per hour and then an 85-mile-per-hour knuckleball. And I was like, no,
Not
that ain't
possible.
right. And then so I looked it up and I was like, there's this year in all of baseball through baseball savant, no one has thrown either of these pitches at that speed at all. And I was like, it was the only
Okay,
thing that like jumped out. Where I was like, wait.
legit. Legit. I take it. I take it. Um
But then I
uh
started thinking, like, how far in the future is this set? Like, how, have pitchers
no,
developed a
I'm
new?
wrong. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. I accept my failure as a thing.
Oh,
And GPT wrote that and I did not know enough to change it. Yeah.
here we go. Yeah,
Or
multi fact.
or it's the one supernatural moment in the most wanted novel.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No,
Well,
that's legit. That's legit. Wait. What are the speeds? What are the real speeds?
like 83 to 87 would be a curveball, and
Oh.
a knuckleball would be in like the mid 70s to upper
Mm,
70s. It's like it's
okay.
not super far off, but it's like distinctive enough because a lot of like pitch tracking is based on speed numbers. So you'd be like, oh, slider's like 92 if it's 97, or like there it won't it, that'll be a fastball of one
Yeah,
variety
yeah.
or another. Like they're flavored. So like it's just sort of like baked in where I was like, that would be a really crazy curveball. Like you
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah, yeah.
want to throw that. That would be a easier pitch to hit than a slower pitch to
Okay, okay.
max.
Well, also,
Very
I have
nerdy level of
there
this.
are a few like typos that I'm gonna send to them, so I might maybe
Uh,
I'll fix this.
tell
Unless you
Philip, tell Philip he's supposed to have that's something he should have been on.
why was that copy editor not? Yeah, yeah.
How are you not checking Baseball Savant on this
Yeah, yeah,
moment?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No,
No, that's
it's
legit.
super
Well,
funny.
I'm
Super funny. So before we wrap up though, do you want to talk about Patchwork because that's
oh
also
yeah,
coming
yeah.
out? It is October, correct?
Actually it's August.
It's August. Oh,
Yeah,
never
yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
Way sooner than I thought.
I
So
know. Yeah, yeah, it's very soon. Yeah, so yeah, it's actually uh the books are published out of order in how they were written, which
oh.
my agent editor said nobody cares about, but I did. Like I was kind of learning how to write novels with humans through a collage process again. Your book, I noticed other, I was looking for nature patterns, but I would notice other patterns. Like, for instance, the first line of Virginia Woolf showing
Mhm.
up in other books, like Cixin Liu's Three Body Problem series. It's a
Oh,
pretty simple line, the sun had not yet risen.
right.
I was like, wait, is this in a lot of books? The sun had not yet risen. It's the first lines are a big deal, right? So
Yeah.
and or lots of in classic novels, people like striking out words to remove specificity or profanity. So like
Yep.
I walked across the M dash bridge,
Hmm.
or instead of damn it, it's D dash dash N it exclamation point.
Yep.
Um, and so I started to kind of gather other patterns. And at first I thought I'd do a short story collection. And then I realized, actually, what if I put them all together into one story that was kind of continuous? Somebody kind of compared the book to Exercises in Style.
Yeah.
But then I would say if it were one story, not one story through all the styles. Um, Whereas Exercises in Style is just the same story over and over again. So it begins with a chapter that's all first lines from other novels,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends with a chapter that's all last lines from other novels. And in the middle is everything from like basically what's the most visual moment of this? Um, I can literally show you like
Yeah.
all these M dashes kind of
Oh, yeah.
uh turning into like a Mad Lib. Very juvenile moment of all the ejaculations from other novels, like exclamations turned into an orgy. Uh, Descriptions of monsters are framed in actual picture frames in a Gothic hall. There's a chapter of illustrations from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
becomes like a dream sequence. And then at one point there's even a all these Charles Dickens illustrations that becomes a
Oh,
continuous picture of a walk from a rural castle to a town.
very interesting.
Um, and and yeah, and then there's like a chapter. It's a run-on sentence made up of like running and jogging language. Or there's like choose your own adventure. It's so every chapter I wanted the texture to be radically different, but the
That's
story to
cool.
continue.
I
So
think that's great.
yeah, it's fun. My mom read it in 2 hours. It's it was kind of uh I think the summer that I wrote this, I first read Cesar Ira for the first time.
Oh,
I
that's
just
and you reference that in here too.
Yeah,
Reference.
yeah, the flight forward method. Yeah. And I just loved a story I could read in a day.
Oh God,
You
yeah.
feel like you accomplished something,
Yep.
And so this is that, Patchwork, the most wanted, most unwanted is not that. Um, Although, sometimes for big books, I take like a kitchen, like a butcher knife to it and cut it in half and like tape it, which you could totally do to this. Like,
This
um,
this happened on our other podcast on
oh,
Too
you
Much
did this?
Review with the Golden Notebook. The other one of the other hosts was traveling, so he had to cut it into pieces to take it with him because it didn't fit. So
Well,
yeah.
and I do it to trick my brain because
Oh, so you
sometimes
can
I
get
just feel like if it looks like a burden, there's something in me that it's like I'm too tired to read that right now. Or, but if I break it up, like I
yeah.
bought the Septology, I have it right there, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I think I need to buy the version that has only two and one.
I
Again,
agree. I
it's
agree.
it's just like tricking your brain. I did this with Don Quixote,
Oh
like
yeah.
I cut it in half, and that's how I was able to read it. So, anyway, but yeah, it's a short book. It's
No.
oh,
There we go.
we're back.
There,
Awesome.
yeah, I don't know what's happening. I'm we're like wigging out. I think there's been like a problem here with our internet for like the week since it got super hot. Things have seemed like on and off. So I blame the heat. I have no idea. Oh, we froze again. Ah, come back. Oh no.
Maybe. Oh no.
There we go.
I'm gonna keep improvisatorily dancing to make in the anyway.
That's perfect. Let's wrap it here just before this dies since it's
Yeah,
having.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chad. This is really fun.
Thank you. This has been really great talking to you. And for anyone who's listening, you can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, at Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And then on YouTube is where you should be watching this and listening to it because then you get to see all of the visual elements, the charts, and all of that. Also, like and subscribe when you're there. Links are all this are in the show notes. And we'll be back soon, possibly with another AI related podcast. There's a secret like mini trilogy that I'm cooking up about different forms of using AI within the creative world, both business side, creative wise, all sorts of things. But we'll see. That's not been recorded, so I'm not promising anything. So, anyways, till then, it's been great talking to you and everyone. I hope
Really
you have
great
a
talking to you.
good time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.